Hello, today we will find out all the information about the Alpine A110, perhaps even someone has heard about this car, but, Saravno, here you can learn a lot more useful things. Subscribe to my YouTube channel not to miss new car reviews. Happy viewing. It reminded me of a slightly stretched Volkswagen Beetle, an unsightly typewriter. Nothing else comes to mind. Are you kidding me? Smile. The Alpine A110 is considered one of the most outstanding rally cars in the world, along with the Lancia Stratos and Audi Quattro, despite the fact that it was equipped with a very weak 1.6-liter engine, which developed only 125 horsepower. In speed and handling, at that time, it simply had no equal, thanks to its ultra-light weight, of course. And you shouldn't drive a Beetle. And both cars are pretty cute, although the Renault is outperforming the Beetle here, in my opinion. Yes, even if he is at least a 3-time champion of the entire universe. It is not necessary to judge by one achievement. For me, the fact that he has a rally legend doesn't make him any more beautiful. And I don't drive a bug. Where the bug is now, and where your Alpine is now, attempts to revive it are only being made. And the Bilt is the most massive car in history. What matters is what automakers do for people in the world at large, not how many victories they've won in a rally. I saw this car at the International Exhibition in Crocus. There was a rally version in yellow. If you look closely, it will replace a little Beetle of that time, only slightly stretched. There is absolutely no resemblance to the Beetle. And for some reason I like the car. I love companies that have a single style in all models. And in this car, Renault Alpine is recognized almost intuitively. The characteristics are good. With such power, the car is probably economical. Smile. The tractor has no resemblance to a crocodile, but here it is, just not everyone wants to see it. The 1565cc engine, 102 horsepower/5500, 137 Nm/4000, with two twin-chamber carburetors Weber 40 Co., borrowed from the Renault 16 TS. In 1969 had a regular version of the Alpine Renault A110, 1600, and the updated sports version of the A110, 1600S, which appeared at the end of the year, received a new 1605cc engine, 125 horsepower/6000, 144 Nm/5000. with more productive twin-chamber carburetors Weber 45 Co., from the new donor Renault 17 TS. With it, a car with a curb weight of 665 kg, dry, 635 kg, could accelerate to hundreds in 7.1 seconds, reaching a maximum speed of 204 km/h. However, according to the company, the 5-speed manual transmission allowed to reach the speed limit of 215 km/h. The full name of the model is Alpine Renault A110, 1600S Berlinet Series 2. This model was the most dynamic in acceleration, even the more powerful versions of the A110 1600C and 1600SC, which received a slightly more powerful 140-145 horsepower engine, were 130 and 135 kilograms heavier, and reached hundreds in 7.4 seconds at a top speed of 210 km/h. It turns out that the A110 1600C and 1600SC versions were not so powerful and more powerful. The first of them received electronic injection instead of carburetors, and the second added power only due to increased operating speeds. Their 140 horsepower, 6,250, 157 Nm/5450, and 145 horsepower/6250, 159 Nm/5450. This is the gross power. Our A110, 1600S, under such conditions, had 138 forces, and net they had only 126 horsepower/6250, 147 Nm/5450, and 128 horsepower/6250. 149 Nm/5450, so you should not be surprised by the drop of characteristics. Perhaps not worth it. A very interesting car, and the design for its dimensions is the best. Given that the car is old and there are no advanced technologies in it, I think only the appearance of an old paint and varnish coating can spoil its appearance. Sketches of the Renault A110 concept have appeared. It will be possible to launch it in a series. The Beetle was created at a time when the design trend of the Alpine A110 hadn't changed much, and both cars were rear-engined and both engineers were thinking about aerodynamics. An amazing conclusion in its logic, and no less ambiguous conclusion from it. If we talk about the Volkswagen Beetle, then its well-known mass production started almost immediately after the end of World War II, in 1946. The car itself was conceived and first introduced a decade earlier, in 1938, as the KDF-38. While his idea prototype, Type 12 for Zone DAP, appeared 7 years earlier, in 1931. That is, no matter how you look at it, and between the Renault Alpine A110 of 1969 and the Volkswagen Quattro, there is at least 23 to 31, or even all 38 years of difference in terms of creation. Over the years, automotive trends, technological solutions, and design preferences have changed somewhat, or rather, very thoroughly. So, the supposed kinship and analogies are somewhat inappropriate. With no less success, it was possible to indicate rear-wheel drive, a 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine, low weight, a coupe-like body, or a sporty focus as common features. Although, the latter is more applicable to Volkswagen Quattro's own evolution, the Porsche 356, which appeared in 1948. Is it really worth so little? If this makes any difference, then in reality cars, of course, in good condition, qualitatively restored, or with their own history, in this version are periodically put up for auction with price tags of about 100 to 150,000 euros, which is quite at the level of their alternatives by class, status, and time. Of course, the Alpine A110 1600S, even in its production years, was by no means a cheap car, but no one was going to raise its price tag for some pretentious purposes, either, because real customers want to appreciate it. In other words, a sort of middling among sports cars. At the same time, non-auction chassis can be purchased, if found, twice or three times cheaper, for the 40,000 euros indicated in the description. 1 to 4 images, A110 1600 SI 1975, 5 and 6, A110 1600 SX 1977, 7, A110 1300 in 1975, 8. A110 1600S from 1972. As for the production of the 1600 model itself, you will have to read a little. From 1969 to 1970, cars of the so-called VA series were produced, 1,565 cubic centimeters engine with 2 Weber 40 co-carburetors from Renault 16TS, 92, 93, HP, 5,800 and 121 Nm/4,000 in 1969, 25,600 francs, or 100, 102, HP, 5,500 and 137 Nm/4,000 in 1970, 26,700 francs, 730 kg curb weight, 4-speed synchronized gearbox Type 330, or optional 5-speed Type 353. In the same year, 1969, the sports version of the 1600S, known as the VB series, also appeared, which is a homologated version of the corresponding A110 1600S Group 3 racing car from Alpine. Alas, despite the above comments and specifications, this version was equipped with the same 1565cc engine. Although, and fairly modified, what to do? For the sake of confirming homologation, I had to put this option into production. How do you like it when, after not the easiest working day, coming home from work and seemingly redoing everything that needed to be redone, you find the opportunity to sit down at the computer and comment a little and clarify the previous comments? Suddenly it turns out that you did not buy everything you need in the store, and what you bought is not what you need. That you went for a walk with the dogs in the wrong place. And then, I also put them in order, washed and fed them, not so much. What did you clean up the apartment in the wrong way? Missing here and here. What, instead of a whole day sitting at the computer, it was necessary to do everything correctly and on time, and not now, when you already have no nerves enough. Smile. Therefore, we will continue from the place where we had to stop the comments. As befits the sports version, in the specifications of which it was necessary to state at least the most important homologation changes for racing chassis of a similar model, the 1600S version received a modified engine with a compression ratio increased to 10:25, new, even more productive Weber 45 co-carburetors, larger valves, and the valve mechanism itself with increased lift. In addition, the 5-speed, fully synchronized Type 353 transmission, which was optional for the previous version, has not only become standard equipment for it, but also, in turn, has undergone appropriate modifications. Apparently, the list of innovations announced for the new version sufficiently satisfied the experts of the Homologation Commission with its composition and implementation on the production version to satisfy the application from January 1, 1970 and allow the production of racing Alpine A110 1600S Group 4, where all this was even more reworked for racing specifics, while the simpler production version, as expected, from October 1, 1970, was announced as Alpine A110 1600S Group 3, and, since January 1971, imperceptibly lost its homologation tail, turning, simply, Alpine A110 1600S. Since, unlike the homologated Alpine A110 1600S Group 3, the racing version had to compete with its competitors on racetracks, mainly rally or circuit marathons, for results, and not for participation. It received a lightweight body with a polycarbonate rear window to the allowed 650 kilograms. For a production car, the weight was stated as 685 kilograms, and a more competitive 1,596 cc engine, known as Group 4 Uzi. Already in the following year, 1971, the differences between the versions became even more noticeable. The racing version received a large 98-liter gas tank. However, 650 kilograms of weight was saved, in the cabin, just behind the pilot and navigator seats, wider and more tenacious tires, more hardy and larger brakes, a lockable differential and characteristic deflectors on the rear wings. In 1972, after winning the rally, similar deflectors appeared on production versions. The engine of the production model developed 138, 140 HP, 6,144 Nm/5,000, which provided a light 685 kg car with 215 km/h and 6.9-second acceleration. By the way, the 102 horsepower version of the A110 1600 described above accelerated to hundreds in 8.5 seconds and could reach 195 km/h. The dynamic performance of the Alpine A110 1600S Group 4, equipped with a 172, 175 horsepower engine, at 6,500, and 166 Nm at 5,400, of course, was even higher, 225 km/h top speed, and 5.4-second acceleration. By the way, since for almost a decade in our rating, some of its visitors have managed to get quite good at understanding not only appearance and classification, but also technical issues. They can correct me. They say that the declared power and moment, in the matter of speed and acceleration, if we discard purely fan emotions, there are even fewer specialists, cannot correspond to each other in any way. Therefore, I consider it necessary to get better. The above power values correspond to the initially overestimating American say method of measuring on a naked motor, and in the complete state, the real power turned out to be less than 20%. So, the real power of the 92-strong Alpine A110 1600 of 1969 was only 70 forces, the 102-strong Alpine A110 1600 of 1970 80 forces, the 138-strong Alpine A110 1600S of 1970 110 forces, and the 172-strong Alpine A110 1600S Group 4S, 138 forces. What? Coincidence? I do not think. Very well corresponded to the declared power of a similar production model. Isn't it true that the dynamic characteristics are quite decent, as for a car with a little more than 100 horsepower? As you can see, the Americans, who until recently held on to their own convenient say method, also successfully used this error, homologating their own racing cars for their civilian power. Therefore, even with the most honest specifications, between the 425-strong 426 Hemi and the equally 425-strong 425 race Hemi, and not only them, the power difference could legitimately reach hundreds, and, which happen much more often, more horses. And, with the same passport power, a road muscle car equipped with 426 Hemi, as befits a 350 horsepower car, often lost to its 400-plus strong European opponents in speed, while its modified version with 426 race Hemi, even with honest specifications, having at least the same 425 forces, and more often modestly not called 480 to 550 forces, its European classmates broke not only in traditional dragster acceleration, but also in maximum speed. If, of course, the box allowed it. However, I digress again. Smile in the truly debut year for the 1600S in 1970, its price in France was 30,840 francs, while the similar racing version of the 1600S Group 4S, already 47,100 francs. In the following years, 1971 and 1972, both due to low inflation and due to gradual modernization, these different variants, bearing the same homologation designation, rose in price to 31,760, 47,800 and 35,400, 52,400 francs. However, since homologation required the submission of a certain number of production cars, which the French companies still doubted the possibility of real demand for, and quite production cars were often converted into racing cars, it was considered superfluous and misleading to specify the specific number of both of them after stating about 800 built 1600 SVB series cars. However, according to expert estimates, the number of truly racing cars Alpine A110 1600S Group 4 is unlikely to exceed 100. Meanwhile, both progress and rivals have not stood still, and it is time to raise the stakes for Société des Automobiles of Dieppe, France, to improve its competitiveness. Already in the middle of 1972, a larger, 1605cc engine from the new Renault 17 TS was put into operation for the 1600cc model. And the Alpine A110 1600S produced in 1972 to 1974 equipped with it became known as representatives of the new VC series. Despite the seemingly rather modest increase in working volume, the new engine turned out to be a kind of qualitative milestone for the company's sports division, as it brought French sports cars to the more prestigious, and more complex in terms of the number of competitors and their professional, technological and, in fact, racing potentials, category up to 2000cc. As for the previous VB series, the company homologated the new version in two versions, Alpine A110 1600S Group 3, which was supposed to be transformed into a production model by allowing homologation, and a more thoroughly modified Alpine A110 1600S Group 4, for the sake of which everything was started. Fully understanding that in a higher racing league, betting on a well-upgraded, but only symbolically increased engine volume would be very risky and expensive, Marc Mignotet, who created the previous 1596cc Group 4 usine, proposed its worthy successor, the 1798cc 1600S Group 4 usine engine, which apparently out of modesty practically retained the designation of its predecessor. In contrast to the 138 horsepower 1565cc engine, the new 1605cc engine managed to maintain the same compression ratio, and more efforts were made to optimize the workflow and more targeted tuning of the same Weber 45 TCO carburetors for both engines. As a result, the maximum rated power increased slightly, only to 140 forces, while the real power increased more thoroughly, to 126 forces at 6,250, and the moment, to 149 Nm/6,000. However, these 140 forces were achieved at 6,000 to 6,250 revolutions, and the maximum torque value increased from 144 Nm/5,000 to 159 Nm in the range from 5,450 to 5,950 revolutions. Alas, I understand that often repeating the initially overestimated power I mislead not very attentive readers. But on most resources it is given, and I work with it more comfortably. Whereas in the specifications on the page, of course, it is better to use the correct values, rather than the popular ones. On July 1, 1972, the necessary homologation for the production Alpine A110 1600S Group 3 was obtained, while on January 1, 1972, the racing version of the Alpine A110 1600S Group 4 received homologation, as having a completely understandable priority for the company. As for its engine, its characteristics have reasonably turned out to be even higher and more promising. Additional working volume was obtained by boring the 1565cc block from 77.0 to 82.5 mm. The standard motor was bored only to 78.0 mm, rated at 180 to 185 horsepower at 7,000 revolutions per minute. The maximum torque is almost 40% higher than the standard 1600S engine, reaching 195 Nm/6,000 to 6,250. Accordingly, the real power and torque were 165 forces and 175 Nm. If you consider that even taking into account the requirements of your group, the minimum curb weight had to be set at a fairly high level of 710 to 750 kilograms. The increase in power was quite enough to accelerate the race car to 105.25 seconds and reach a maximum speed of 252 km/h. Unlike the engine, the race car itself received a more correct designation Alpine A110 1800S Group 4, while its civilian version, for the third year, remained with the same designation Alpine A110 1600S, 685 kilograms, 210 kilometers, h and 6.5 second acceleration. As before, it was equipped with a 5-speed, by then already standard, Type 353 transmission and, if desired, could be purchased for 37,900 francs. Interestingly, the cost of the racing version was never publicly disclosed. The company, which is very closely associated with the French Renault, did not smile at all, in the pursuit of sporting achievements and high technical perfection, to turn out to be such an overly exclusive manufacturer of supercars, undermining the image of a more popular, although not alien to the same motorsport, concern. Therefore, the issue of the cost of purchasing the racing version was discussed one-on-one, without unnecessary publicity. However, according to a certain relationship with the cost of the serial version, it can be assumed that we could talk about an amount of about 60 to 65,000 francs. It is worth mentioning that the engine, as well as the car, turned out to be so good that immediately after the debut of the new model on the racetracks, Alpine managed to win first place in the prestigious World Rally Championship of Marques in 1973, which was much more preferable and honorable achievement than a banal race for profit and production of a little-known exclusive. As far as we know, the issue of the number of produced 1,600cc cars, again, was artfully ignored. But, according to the same indirect signs, we could talk about 850 VC series cars. In addition, the 1800cc model was so successful in its time and place in the rally and circuit championships that the company even, but this may be a specially veiled way to justify the absence of an heir, refused to develop the next evolutionary modification to replace it, preferring to refine and upgrade already produced cars. Some of these evolutions were the Alpine A110 1800S Group 4 with already 200, 220, 235, 255 horsepower 1.8-liter engines, with a 16-valve head. The original A110 was completely done with an 8-valve head, 2 camshafts and, although this may not be accurate, turbocharging, with which Renault, and Alpine, of course, just experimented in the late 70s, both on sports prototypes, and in the races of the Queen of Motorsport. Thus, further improvement of the 1600cc series continued at the expense of more civilian sports cars, unnecessarily raising the indicators and price tag for which it would be considered bad form in relation to the donor car company. And so, it was at the upper limit of what is allowed for French cars of this class, power, characteristics and market segment. From 1974 to 1975, Alpine introduced its new series, known as the 1600 VD, equipped with a front suspension from the more high-profile A310 and a choice between traditional carburetors and newfangled fuel injection, for the sake of greater popularity and coverage of the market segment, which, as mentioned above, limited the possible cost. Released in 2 versions, depending on the intended sales market. The internal version, intended for the French market, received the designation 1600 SC. As follows from the designation, its main difference was the 1605cc engine and carburetor power system, which proved so successful on cars of the previous VC series. In order not to repeat myself, I note that the car did not differ from the previous series in technical terms in almost anything, except for the mentioned one, while the overly meticulous can always find the necessary number of differences, unless, because of the increased mass to 710 kilograms, it became slightly slower, both in speed, 208 km/h, with the same passport 210 km/h, and in acceleration, up to 2 to 7.5 seconds to hundreds. For the rest of the market, a more advanced version of the 1600 SI was offered with an electronic injection system from Bosch. In 1975 it became possible to choose an alternative version with injection from Lucas. The power of this version has symbolically increased to 145 forces. Apparently, so symbolically that I was not able to quickly find more detailed specifications, which is why I can assume that the 210 km/h and 7.2-second acceleration mentioned in the previous comment belong to this version, as it is more advanced. As far as we know, the 5-speed gearbox for the Alpine A110 1600 SC, SIVD series has been subjected to additional rally improvements. Door panels, instead of handles, received a push-button opening/closing system. 3-spoke wheels on cars in 1976 could be replaced with 4-spoke ones, and on later sports cars, to improve aerodynamics and, since the temperature regime and the amount of air needed for the injection engine could well be sufficient without additional air intakes and deflectors, they were removed. As expected, there was a small extra charge for progress, and in 1974, the cost of both the carburetor version of the A110 1600 SC and the injection version of the A110 1600C had to be unified and raised to 38,600 francs, and in the following year, 1975, it increased by another 1,500 francs. As has become a tradition, the company tried not to advertise the exact figures of production volumes, although, according to experts, we could talk about the value between 481 and 588 cars produced in a couple of years. The last one in the history of the Alpine A110 1600, which was already somewhat prolonged, albeit with periodic innovations, but without any zest, like a specially prepared factory racing model, was the so-called VH series, which started in 1976 and lasted until the model was discontinued in July 1977. Cars of this series were designated as 1600 SX and equipped with another new engine, 1647cc from Renault 16DX. Unfortunately, The models were not allowed to leave in a decent way, and the new engine appeared in the midst of another relapse of concerns about the environmental friendliness of the exhaust and reducing fuel consumption. Therefore, in order to feed the cylinders with simpler, cheaper and less frequent gasoline, the compression ratio was reduced to 9:25. Two productive two-chamber carburetors Weber 45 Co were replaced with 132-7, and the maximum power revs were reduced to 5,500 to 6,000 revolutions, as much as possible, compensating for the power shortage by using a larger and heavier engine. As a result, even the rated output was only 109 horsepower/6,250 with a maximum torque of 145 Nm/3000. While the real power barely reached 95 horsepower/6,128 Nm/3000. If we also add a curb weight of up to 750 kilograms, without a driver, of course, then hopes for decent dynamics would be very optimistic. So, the real maximum speed barely reached 190 km/h, and acceleration to hundreds took a long-forgotten 9.2 seconds. Therefore, in order not to upset possible wealthy customers, inspired by the recent success of rally and racing versions of the car that has risen in price in its latest modification to almost 50,000 francs, 49,900, to be more precise, and also so weak dynamic characteristics, for the Alpine A110 1600 SX, at least in advertising brochures, it was decided to give it at least a little more temperament, actually repeating the dynamics of the very first 1600cc model of 1969. And then, if from the position of 195 km/h the maximum speed of special quibbles in the discrepancy from customers could not be expected, theoretically, if it is aggregated with a more powerful engine, the gearbox could provide all 223 km/h, then even the 8.5-second acceleration of the 102 horsepower A110 1600, almost 10 years ago, really developing only 80 forces, for the 109 horsepower A110 1600 SX, thanks to the efforts of motor engineers, which actually develops 95 forces, it was unattainable. Therefore, out of respect for customers, we had to agree on a compromise of 8 seconds. As you can see, unlike in 1969, the car was no longer particularly attractive for customers, too expensive for its characteristics and real status, especially since the A310 model was already in production for several years, and after holding out for a couple of years with grief, the last 389th sports car of this model left the assembly area at the factory in Dieppe, France, on July 28, 1977. At the same time, the total output was 7,350 cars. And exactly 2 years later, on July 28, 1979, the French company brought the A110 model to the International Rally Reunion Circuit for the last time, achieving the last success. Richie Co 5 Thank you for your efforts.